right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, thank you for those generous words. And it's a heavy, sort of rainy, dark day here. And I don't know about the south of Kerala so much, but here, it's good to have so many people here. I want to thank Professor Shine, who first contacted me about this conversation, and Professor Sajji, who has been most relentless in sort of calling up and following up and all of that. And it's one of those well thought out. We as theater people, we always look at what goes into sort of the making of an event. So I'm very glad, I'm very honored, I'm very happy to be here, to be seeing all of you. And I have a kind of a strange topic in some sense, quite topical, at the same time slightly strange, because citizenship and theater aren't really connected things largely, when you look at that. I mean, citizenship is serious business. It's the material that newsrooms are made of. And theater is fun, theater is sort of, is a pastime, is that which you do when you have time, and you study, you do a little bit of theater in school and college. So what is the connection between these two? Before that, I should have asked this earlier, but Professor Sajji, could you tell me how much time do I have? I know it's still 7 o'clock, but what is the distribution like? I mean, how much?
So you can go up to, you have around 45, you can take up to 50 minutes.
All right, that's great. Thank you. Yeah. So, and, so these look completely like different things. And why are we looking at it together? In fact, I had this kind of a question in 2005 when there was an International Federation of Theatre Research annual conference was held on the same topic in the University of Maryland, College Park. And at that conference, I heard Professor David Wiles, very important performance studies, I would say even thinker, writer, academician, talk about, he had one of the keynote addresses. So I owe a lot of my thinking in this area to his frame and his ideas and all of that. And I've had the privilege of working with him because he was working on the Indian theater. So there's some manuscripts shared with me. So that's one of my sources for this program, this conversation, which I've been interested in for a while now. And also, I had looked at a French performance artist named Orlan, O-R-L-A, and you could Google her and find more about her. And Orlan is a surgery artist. She does surgery on her body, and she talks about the experience. With local anesthesia, and then she talks about the experience. And one of the things that she did was she was actually trying to get an aesthetic surgery done on her with all the ideal women, such as Madonna, such as Mona Lisa, such as Cleopatra, and take their body parts and create it through plastic surgery. The Cleopatra's nose is famous, so she would take that, and the forehead of Mona Lisa is famous. She would take that, and she'd actually put it together, and on her body, not as an idea, but as a living thing. And she said that she would call herself, that project is called the Reincarnation of Saint Orlan. But the interesting thing is that she said she would apply for a passport from the French authorities after the project is done. So that is a certain performance of citizenship on the body. So these were kind of beginning points of citizenship and theater. And but when I mentioned citizenship after last year, after 2009, December 15, and to an audience that's largely constituted of students, it's quite interesting because, we would always come up with Citizenship Amendment Act and the NRC and the protests that were led by women in Shaheen Bagh, and also students across the country. All college campuses erupted in unison against a bill that they found to be unethical, exclusive, majoritarian. So when you talk about citizenship and theater, citizenship, you mention citizenship. It's an electrifying word. It's sort of, you know, either you get shocked or you get energized. I don't know what happens, but yes, it's a big matter of contention across the country, and it's not academic deliberations. It's not theoretical deliberations. The very existence of what makes us a people comes into that. So I'm looking at this theory, but also I hope to sort of arrive at how we can understand the performance of theater, the performance of citizenship in the latest and the newest and largely almost one of the most remarkable political movements in not just in Indian Republic's history, but also in modern political history and feminist movements across the world in its history itself. So I want to start talking about, how do we start thinking about citizenship and theater? Citizenship and theater are connected, and David Wiles makes this brilliant connection, saying that citizenship was spectatorship at a certain point in history. In April, it had 30,000 was its population, and 17,000 was the seating capacity of the theater. All right, so that's a lot of people, right? That's more than 50% of the people, of the population. And what was your citizenship? What was your passport? What was your document? What was your unique identification number? You didn't have any of those things. What you had was the right to watch plays, right? If you are a spectator, you're a citizen. If you're not a spectator, you're a slave, right? So right to watch plays, right to theater is right. Right to watch plays, right to watch theater is your citizenship. Because that's where you become a people. All right, you come together, you talk about these things, so it's very important that in theater history, in the history of citizenship, and citizenship is an Athenian idea, right, of 4th century BC, around that time, and it actually comes up from, it gets performed in the space of theater. This is extremely important. Right. Thank you. So this is extremely important because if you look at citizenship and theater, you actually also understand there is something very deeply connecting these two, because we all have two selves. One is the individual self and the other is the permeable social self, right? This is in the domain of politics, and in the domain of theater, you actually work with these two things, these two selves, right? How do you become a people? How do you become, and those social values constitute your individual self, and the individual self is a part of the whole thing. I mean, it's like a cell theory, you know, the whole is present in the parts and a whole is made up of parts, right? That sort of a thing. So in that sort of a historical understanding, we understand citizenship and theater are the same. And this actually has a lot of implications for something like tragedy, for example, right? Tragedy, the word meaning is goat play, which means the tragic hero in old Greek theater is actually a person who is a sacrificial lamb at the altar of gods. Right, so you are basically trying to, and why do you do this? Because you don't do this because like you think this person is a hero. The person is actually one who steps out of the collective, goes against his own destiny as designed by the gods. So he needs to be told you can't do that. You have to be part of the collective. You have to stay part of the collective. So when Oedipus goes out and does his own things, he will become a sacrificial lamb at the altar of gods. So there is a certain way in which, just as much as they're coming together through a certain kind of empathy and a certain kind of scare, a certain kind of fear about what could happen to them. So the social control, and as Sobol talks about this, these are normative mechanisms which are used to control people's urges, right? So you control them in theater, you create them in theater, right? The idea of citizenship, the idea of social control, both are constituted in theater. All right. Now we might think this is an old thing, and it's maybe it doesn't have much to do with it. It's an origin story, it's a genesis. But does it have, is it something that has an impact on us later? So I'll try and show you some presentations to show how this is something that continues even today in the idea of democracy, in the idea of citizenship. Let me just show you a presentation, like just some images. Could I get the permission to share the screen, please?
You can directly present it, sir.
I'm not able to do that. That's why. Oh, wait. Yeah, that's my mistake. Just a second.
There is
it's
three dots at the right.
Yeah, I've done that. That's fine. You're able to see this. All right.
Yeah, it's coming.
Yeah,
it's coming, but
yeah, it's because of right. Okay. Yeah. Am I? Is this visible? Is this visible? Am I audible? Hello.
Yes, please. Yes, please carry on.
So this is the devised book on theatre and citizenship, and yeah, this is the Greek-Roman theatre design. All right, and like you can see, a lot of people could sit there. It's like a football stadium or something like that, right? And there are excavations that happened even recently, like 2-3 days ago in Roman area. Greek theatre is not. We don't have pictures of it, but yeah, look at that. Theatre of ancient Rome looks like this. Now, what's interesting to us is there's another image here. Theatre of ancient Rome. This is the Parliament of Egypt. All right, look at the design. Look at the design. It goes like this. It goes like this. It goes like that. And that's how the Parliament of Egypt is designed. That again is the Parliament of Italy. If you see that, it's not very clear. Look at the Parliament of India, Rajya Sabha, which is why it's red. Otherwise, it'd be green if it's Lok Sabha. Now, you could see this sort of an arrangement, this sort of like, where the orchestra is, the actor is, that's where the speaker sits, and all the others sit around. That is the model of our democratically decision-making bodies. Now, this is an interesting question. Why does this happen? Why are our parliaments, many of our parliaments, British Parliament, for example, doesn't look like this, but some of the others I showed you, they do. They share a basic sort of a plan. Why is this? And that's an interesting question, isn't it? Because what is common to citizenship and politics and theatre, citizenship and theatre? Now, what's interesting here is this question of conversation. This, like, because the speaker, the madam chairperson, madam sir, that person is at the center. You have to talk to that person, and then that's how the conversations happen. You sit in a certain way, because debates, as we know it today, debates are supposed to be performances. Debates were never supposed to be matter of something that you identify with. There is a view that somebody gives, and you identify with that view, and then you support that. Is a certain takeover of meaning and a certain lack of sociality that has come into our discussions. By which what I mean is, earlier the original idea was that you get an idea, you need to see both the sides. So somebody argues for and somebody argues against. It's like typical college debates. You're given to argue for, you're given to argue against. Now, it doesn't mean that the one who argues for is arguing for, has to be for it, right? You're given nuclear warfare and you're given, you have to speak for it. It just means you're performing your support for that. You're not there, right? And somebody who's opposing it might be for it in life, but in that performance is being asked to speak against the motion. So what happens is you're supposed to perform your views, and through that I see A and B conversing, and when A and B converse in a certain way, I look at a C position that could emerge from all this conversation. That's how it's actually originally designed, which is why it's a theatrical space that you're talking about. They're all part of a grand, huge Greco-Roman theater, right? This is, and it's so obvious from its basic architecture. So it's a very interesting point to me, right? So it goes like that, and then you would think, all right, it's like, maybe that it was true of the ancient times. What about the later times? And often we hear that people talk about, this is a post-truth era, earlier, which means there's a problem when somebody says it's a post-truth era, because it has a nostalgia for a truth era. It believes that there was a period when people were all very truthful. It suffers from a nostalgia for a golden past where people were truthful. All right? That never existed, because there has been all kinds of issues earlier also. There was never a golden period, golden time kind of thing. So what's actually happening is that it's not truth, pre-truth, truth, post-truth. It's actually pre-meaning, meaning, and post-meaning. What do I mean by pre-meaning, meaning, post-meaning period? If you look at all religions, right? For example, for the longest time, till about 400, 500 years ago, you couldn't translate Bible from Latin, right? You couldn't translate the Vedas till 19th century. You couldn't translate the Quran, right? So major languages worked, major religions worked in languages that people didn't understand. All right, that was how it was. So you only worked with performances because you didn't understand the meaning. You worked with a certain understanding of, okay, this is what this is the energy it gives. It's the impulse it does. It gives. It's not necessarily a meaning, an idea, because you wouldn't understand an idea in the Bible or in the Quran or in the Bhagavad Gita because you simply didn't understand the meaning, right? Even then, it worked. Well, how did it work? It worked because of theater. It worked because of performance, right? It's interesting. Medieval church is the origin point of a lot of theater, because theater was the way in which you could get to other people, right? People, to the laity who did not understand Latin, because they were not supposed to read Latin. It was only for the clergy and as part of their power, right? So if you look at some of the medieval performances, they all come from miracle plays, morality plays, interludes. All of them come from the church, interestingly, right? So I'll just present you another, I'll show you some slides from that. So something like this. All right. You see a cathedral at the back, and then there is a performance in front, right? And if you look at this, there's a cathedral at the back again, the performance of a miracle play. Again, you can see another one, because this was where through performance, people had to be taken together. So meaning is actually the new thing. Meaning is what, 300, 400 years old. But pre-meaning performance was always there, right? And yes, later, with certain kinds of majoritarianism, certain kinds of political advancement, you would see the meanings, the theaters taking over again. This is not a new thing. It happened in the 1920s and 30s, in Hitler's case, many people's cases, right? So I'll show you Hitler's procession, near concreteness of human bodies in a Nazi procession. You look at that. It's very well organized, right? Look at another Nazi procession, which again reminds you of all these Roman, Romanesque kind of figures. It's very well organized. And this doesn't come as a fluke, because Hitler was a failed scenographer. A scenographer is a person who organizes, who designs spaces for theater. He didn't work. He wasn't successful in German theater. But yes, he always knew about the power of meaning, the power of, the power of performance, the power of space. Disturbance coming from. May I have the participant please mute?
Dear participants, I request you all to keep your mics mute, please.
All right. So thank you about that. Right. The interesting question here is that how does performance come back? How does a post-meaning society get constructed, right? And it happens in theater. I mean, a lot of times people ask, so-and-so said these terrible things. There's a majoritarian leader who's saying this. How's he getting away with these things? How's that possible? It's possible precisely because we need to look at where they're saying this from, right? Because when you read it on a Twitter, when you read it on Facebook, it reads terrible. But within a space where he gives out these speeches, it might be a very different energy, a very different content in itself. So the point is, citizenship is the act of becoming a people, and the act of becoming a people is not about how much you think and understand and work with. That's not what it is. It's about how much space do you share, how do you come together, right? For example, if you look at the English Reformation, you see plays, morality plays that churches did outside their cathedrals. The church did outside the cathedrals. They got banned by Queen Elizabeth because she got scared that they're going to have an impact on the people's mind. Right? Later, we say, oh, Puritans are terrible. They banned all theater. But Puritans believed in meaning a lot more. And because of their insistence on meaning, they moved away from the performance into the text, right? And this is how we seem to think that it's a liberal idea to believe that people are swayed by meaning, people are swayed by energies, people are swayed by communications that happen outside language. So it is extremely important for any kind of political project to think about its spaces. Right. And again, this is, I talked about ancient Greece. I talked about medieval theater. I can tell you another example, right? For example, the Elizabethan Theater. During Shakespeare's time, the theater, and a little before and after, the theater in 550, theater used to be a general thing. People came together and had performances in the medieval periods, sometimes a lot of them under the church and sometimes outside the church. Theatre becomes a state subject for the first time in 1572 with patronage law brought in by Queen Elizabeth. What is patronage law? If you are an actor, if you want to put up a play, you should have the permission, you should have a patron who's a lord of the Queen. Right? For the first time, theatre is, state is intervening in theatre. And they're okay with whatever is happening within that space because it is state sanctioned, right? And that is the space that's not part of the public sphere. That is the only public sphere there is, because printing hasn't started, doesn't come till the 18th century, late 17th, early 18th centuries, right? There is no TV, no newspaper, nothing. You became a people around the theatrical space, the Globe Theatre. And Globe Theatre is interesting because you have all kinds of people, from lord to the cobbler to the goldsmith going there. You had characters of all kinds there, right? Which is all under a queen. And it was a clear cross-section of the British society. Theatre was the public sphere, right? It was not expensive, 1 penny per ticket and all of that. There are 2,775 seats in Globe Theatre around that time. And that is where the public discourse came up. So it's very important what, the kind of common sense that gets propagated in Shakespeare, for example, the anti-Jew rhetoric, right? The anti-Oriental rhetoric, the misogyny. All of that is happening there precisely because it is the space where you could have public communication. So this is like, the connection between theatre and citizenship is quite interesting because during this time, because theatre is the public sphere, right? And during pandemic, the first thing is theatres are shut, plague outbreak, fire, shut down theatres, because theatre is where people come together, right? The first important step of social distancing is close down theatres. All right. So there is a certain, and this used to happen quite often. And if you read that history, you would see, oh, plague outbreak, so shut down theaters. Like sometimes people seem to think that this is happening for the first time. And if you look at, Brecht's play on Galileo, there is quarantine period in 17th century, late 16th, early 17th centuries. Anyways, so the interesting thing is theatre and citizenship go connected all the time, right? Now, if you look at 18th century theatre, which is where the kind of proscenium theatres that we see today come up, right? At that point, what happened, right? Theatre became a space, like we see a lot of English plays, and a lot of plays you see a drawing room, people sitting there and talking about various things. That's the middle class theatre. And middle class theatre comes up in the 18th century, early 18th century, throughout 19th century. This comes up because now, unlike an Elizabethan period, where you had people from all classes, you don't have people from all classes in the audience. Only middle class goes to see that, right? They are going to see only middle class stories. So middle class people watching middle class stories in middle class spaces about middle class, everything is middle class around that time. And in a language that we speak now, which is standardized English, which is created for textual reasons, right? So people went to middle class people went to see theatre because they thought they were the standard human beings, right? So there were substandard human beings in colonies, among women, among working classes. They all had to be uplifted by us because our world is the final world. And to see that, how did they get that idea? They got that idea because they thought they were seeing their own spaces. It's like, the soap operas and sitcoms that we watch today. Nobody lives such complicated lives. All these serials have very complicated plots. How do they work? They work because they work in spaces like ours. They work in drawing rooms, they work in kitchens, they work in the space between the the gate and the house. So there is a whole lot of thing where you sort of, the spaces are very familiar to you. The bodies are very familiar to you. Not the stories. The stories are intricate and complicated. I mean, but because of that space, you stay with it, right? So your normality, your normalcy, your individuality were all created in these spaces, in such bodies, in identifiable bodies. So this is another aspect of theater, right? So if you look at spectatorship and citizenship in Athenian, in ancient Athens, if you look at the medieval clergy's ways of working with people's minds through theater, if you look at the Elizabethan time of creating, making theater a state concern, or if you look at an 18th century capitalist corporate understanding of theater as defining a certain kind of normal, it's like our advertisements would do it now, right? You see and later in 20th century, if you saw the dangerous influence of a failed scenographer like Adolf Hitler, you would know the connections between theater and citizenship. Becoming a people is a performative thing. You perform it, right? So and this is one whole list of ways in which people can be made a people. At the same time, people, the normativism also comes in there. Now, when I say theater is all this, it's a kind of a dangerous thing. I mean, theater is a dangerous avenue. Not quite. I mean, we know a lot, some of those nutcases sort of go around theater now. The others, it's not a regular thing. So why do I say it's a dangerous thing? I don't think it's just a dangerous thing. I think it's also a marvelous possibility. Marvelous possibility because Gandhi was an actor, right? I am not saying this, Charlie Chaplin said this. Gandhi was a very good actor. He was the best actor of his time. Because Gandhi had the best costumes, Gandhi had the best props, actors' props like a stick and a, pair of specs. And he had the best costumes, he had the best lines, he knew what to stage himself, right? And it doesn't mean, I mean, sometimes people say, oh, it's dramabazi, it's nautangi, this is all drama. I mean, all theater, all politics is always drama. And it's not a bad thing, because you are, I mean, if you're working with this, with theater, you are not interested in what you can get, your claps or your best actor awards or winning anything. If you're into theater, you actually want to say that line in that moment. Committing to the moment is important. So it's not a terrible thing that somebody is doing drama. Theater is about, politics is all about drama. It's only about drama. There's nothing else. Right? So when you look at it, you could actually see different kinds of performances, right? A lot of playwrights trying to talk about the possibilities, trying to create possibilities, starting from Ibsen, right? Ibsen's Nora, a character some of you would know. There is this play called A Doll's House, in 1879 play, where the heroine walks out on her husband, which was a big thing in the 19th century, late 19th century and early 20th century. It actually created a big problem because she walked out on her husband and her children and all of that. And when she goes out, she's not a woman walking out alone. She's actually an actor trapped in the middle class stage, trying to pretend it to be something. She quits all of this and she walks out into a space that doesn't already exist because there's no other theater. So just like citizenship and power and all of that are created in theater, they're also undone in theater. That's my argument, right? So she goes out, we don't know where, because it is not just about a character leaving her husband. It's also about a theater person not getting to be in that space, walking out on that middle class space. It's also about a woman who was looking for another space, because a woman had two options by late 17th century. One is to be a homemaker or to be a streetwalker. It's an early 17th century term. Streetwalker is now American, but it's a 17th century British word for prostitute. So home and brothel, a homemaker or a prostitute. In between, there is no space. That space has to be made. How do you signal to it? Through theater again, right? So it's talking about social sort of possibilities and limitations all the time. That's my argument. And if you look at Hitler was trying to create these spectacles like art would do, capitalism would do, something you can't think of, because you become numb because you have such spectacles and you don't know what to think of, how to think at that point. And into this, there comes a breath who says, listen, these are barbaric delights. We should actually be thinking about things. So a breath who makes us think about his characters, or a diary of foe who actually makes us read our newspapers very closely with attention over a long period of time, just to keep our memory alive. All of these performances are also happening in theater. So the constitution of citizenship, the critique of citizenship, the undoing of the making of power and the unmaking of power, all of that happens in the domain of theater. In the domain of theater, not just always as in theater as a designated space, but the theatricality of every day, the theatrical aspects of every day, the performative aspects of every day. That's where it gets sort of constructed. All right. So this is the idea. So this is, I just want to close with this idea of what do we understand about the citizenship protests and theater. Citizenship protests have actually undone a number of things, because it's the third student wave in India. It happened in late 1910s and 20s. Bhagat Singh, students of Lahore, students of Delhi, students of presidency, they all erupted in a certain way, along with the International Congress and Gandhi and all of that. The second was against Indira Gandhi in the 1960s and early 70s. The third is now in 2010s and 20s, right? The first was largely an Indian, these were colonial subjects then, Indian upper caste students, youngsters who sort of came up with a native elite leadership on the political front. Second time, it was the Bahujan, the OBCs of Bihar and Gujarat and various other places, Kerala and Bhadralok of Bengal. That's the second wave, again, which then brought in the politics of Mandal and so on and so forth. And now this time the students are largely women, a number of them Dalit, and lower class women coming to the front line of political protests. And the whole protest was, they were all going into what was seen everywhere in the 1960s in America, the African American kind of sit-in. Sit-in is a very interesting sort of an occupation, because it doesn't say much. It actually performs a certain kind of opposition. It says no, it rejects, it refuses by very being. It doesn't do anything. It exhibits and performs nonviolence, right? So what we saw during that, because we all had a lot of notions about gullies, where largely low caste people stayed, women stayed, they were all suffering, a lot of them Muslim women, they were all suffering in, lost in a certain way. That was the idea. And all of them, interestingly, when they came together, they for the first time showed us constitutional nationalism, because there were so many flags. Indian constitution became a speech subject. Fatima Sheikh, Savitri Phule, Ambedkar, Azad, Nehru, Gandhi, Bhagat Singh. There's a whole sort of thing, and it's very well known. It's not a new thing, but they refilled their imagination, their protest, they refilled all these content. They emptied out all of it and brought in a new kind of narrative, right? So it was performing the body, it is performing gender, and by that taking a very massive, important step towards actualizing Indian citizenship as promised by the Constitution in the idea of India, right? So what happens is that when these things happen, what is its energy? What's its power? We might have to think away from the meaning and go into the body, the prop, the space, and the work of it. Because like there were citizenship protests across Delhi, and most of them in gullies, led by working women who went and worked as maids and so on and so forth, right? The dadis, the maids, the students of across India. So there is a certain way in which politics is inventing its own ways of furthering itself in theatrical forms. That's extremely important to understand. It's not just to understand these movements, but also the majoritarian movements, because most of them don't work with meaning. So a lot of times intellectuals, academicians seem to think we can come up with the best argument and counter it. It cannot be countered, because you have to create spaces where you come together and you question it. You work with it. You have reconstructive plans, right? So if you don't have a reconstructive program, it's not going to work. So, and this in some sense there has been a statement. That statement will be abandoned now. If it has to be taken up, you have to have a plan, right, of social development, of ethically pushing this agenda. And for that, it is, it's what theater does at all points is to create that space. It doesn't do more than that. I mean, like, I'm not going to say every kind of teaching is theater. I'm not going to go into that, because that I think is saying everything is everything else. That doesn't work. So it's extremely important. It's actually quite hearty to see how a space has been created and how that space points to the vacuum, the difficulties, the emptiness, the blind spots that we've been working with, right? And from there, you have to build new narratives. So what theatricality does is to show the emptiness, the futility of the language, the need to abandon a certain kind of rhetoric and get into something else. So that's where we would be looking at. So I don't know, I was trying to like sort of do a survey and try and throw in some ideas. I hope I was in some sense, intelligible, comprehensible. And if you have questions, please ask. Thank you so much for listening to me. I hope I haven't taken too much time, more time than I've been allotted. If I have, I'm sorry about that. So if there are any questions, anything that I know some things are just left like that within this time to present an idea, a thought, something that some throw in some seeds is all that I've tried. I hope that sort of has created some kind of thought, but otherwise I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you so much for being so patient. Thank you for your hospitality. Thank you for your time. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for your wonderful presentation. There is a question already in the chat box. Abhilash P. Do you think, it is from Abhilash P. Do you think it is dangerous to live with the awareness that everyone plays a character of many, one dominant in their own life? We can say that personality the society develops is like a character in a play, and and major consequences is the loss of the real self.
You don't see there is a. I don't think there is a real. I mean, I might think slightly differently here, because I think there is, we're always performing. There is a scene in Being and Nothingness of Sartre where he observes a bearer in a hotel, and the bearer is bending a little more than he should to serve water. He's nodding a little too much than he actually requires while taking orders. So Sartre says, I looked at him and I actually thought of this, because why is he overdoing this? He's acting as a bearer, a waiter, right? So I'm acting. I have to be a bearer like this. I have to be a waiter like this. I have to be a teacher like this. I have to be a student like this. I have to be a father like this. We're always enacting a certain part, and it is not a terrible thing, because it's like in different spaces we're going to behave very differently immediately after this, right? You would, like with your children, with your parents, with your siblings, with your cousins, with the friend you're going to be on the phone. So we always have, according to spaces and time, occasions and situations, we always behave differently, and we are supposed to. So the ideal self, the original self, I don't think it exists, because the most original idea also comes from a social condition, a social system, and it's not a terrible thing. It's, as long as it's not ethical, it's not unethical, it's not harmful, it's not costing somebody physical, I mean, I think, or humiliation, it is perfectly fine, because the original individual self, the purity of heart and all of that, I'm not very sure about that. Now the possibility in theater is that it's when you see this, because you understand how people operate in certain ways in certain spaces, because there's a way in which a lot of times we just go ahead and say, like, these are all idiots, they're supporting so and so, this is such, the dumb. I mean, I think there is a problem with that, because we are being dismissive to begin with. So once you're dismissive, you can't engage with them, right? So instead, if you look at the space, scenography, energy, all of that, I am not saying to understand is not to justify. I mean it in the sense that you go beyond the certain kinds of givens and ask questions that meanings can't give you answers for, right? So I'm not worried whether we lose our selves, because I'm like, for example, a child to me is not innocent, because if you see a child who falls off, and if nobody sees that child, the child doesn't cry. So when a child falls off, you say, don't look that side, because the child will get up and go, because if somebody sees, then the child cries, which means there is a certain way in which it is performed, right? So I mean, and like I said in Gandhi's example, right, it's a useful mechanism, because Gandhi had nothing against the biggest, the most powerful empire in human history, and what he had was definitely certain performative skills, which he used very wisely, very well. That we might be critical, we might have differences of opinion, but there is a theatricality which is very efficient, right? Like Bhagat Singh said about Gandhi, right? Gandhi took revolution to the masses. And when the masses respond, the benevolent dictator can't take it. Right? That was the student response to him at that point. But it is true that he took a revolution to the masses. Right? How did that happen? Because there's some work that has gone into it. So I think, yeah. There are other questions, Professor Saji. Should I be responding to them, or should I?
Yes, please, sir.
Yeah, what do you think is the role of theater space in framing the citizenship and rights of the LGBTQ community? Yeah, as in the LGBTQ community was born out of demonstrations in some sense, right? Because initially there was a certain way in which there was a kind of targeting that happened a lot when AIDS came along. There's one of the readings is that when with that targeting they came together, and once they came together, slowly the Cure Parade and all of that sort of grew, and then that's how the community came up. I mean, obviously, it's part of the 70s kind of movements, late 60s, early 70s movements that came up, and then there's a philosophical basis for it in Foucault, all of that, and it goes on like that. So I think one aspect of this is this as an ethical problem is framed because of emotional reasons, but its counter comes from a politicization, a group formation, a space formation. So and through that, for example, like when with the latest debates in Delhi and all of that, one notices that even the right wing doesn't say we are against gay marriage or lesbianism being legal, because it's a very uncool thing for today's generation. I mean, in our generation, I was in college 20 years ago, there was a certain way in which LGBTQ was the thing of the woke people there. But now it's the common sense of campuses. So it comes from there, and it's very difficult. It's impossible to, in a way, in generational terms, it's impossible to reverse that. And they're also watching American serials and various things. So there's a certain kind of exposure also for the urban middle class. Even otherwise, it's felt like an ethical thing by the youngsters. And in that, the performance is important in terms of collectivization and its ability to give a new language to the conversation and create new sensibility. That is true. But the problem with us looking at theater as an institution in India is that, yes, there are plays. There have been a lot of plays that come up in the theater space, but theater in India is not a people's kind of thing, because it's not a regular thing. Theater tradition has not been sort of cultivated like that. All theater here is, in some sense, experimental theater. So in that experimental space, there are very interesting things coming up also. But for it to be democratized, for it to be made people's, not in the popular sense, it needs to work now with music and movies, which it is doing. I mean, some of the references in, for example, popular Malayalam movies. I'm not just talking about, the art movies and all of that. It's very, 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 it's a very cool thing. So there is that sensibility getting formulated. And in a place like Kerala, which is actually very, very orthodox, very conservative society. So one doesn't know, and with students sort of not finding a certain kind of space, I don't know how far it will go. But theater has theater and poetry and all of that alone as institutions might not be able to do it. We require spaces and collectives that can push this agenda as a matter, as an ethical, as as an inclusive sort of a project. So that is how it would work. I don't know if I'm answering you correctly. It seems to be, but yeah, that's largely it. Yeah. All right. Now comes citizenship and citizenship and national education policy really are interconnected. What's the role an artist have to play to make awareness about this? I mean, national education policy is basically a lot of old things sort of put together again. And it's my fundamental philosophical problem with that document is not a problem with this government. It's a problem with our schools, universities, and teachers, and courses. For example, we've been talking about classical Indian literature as something that sort of finished with in theater Natya Shastra. I mean, Natya Shastra is like what, 4th, 5th century. After there was nothing that happened, which is Indian. So the kind of definition of Indian national as classical is not something that the current government brought in. So that understanding is a hugely problematic one. And other things, commercialization has always been happening. So if you are talking about how do we address the question of as artists or as students, how do we address the question of rethinking citizenship? It's not like it's not a CAA kind of thing. National education policies. National education policy will cause a lot of problems because whatever rosy things that they might say, a lot of it is going to be terrible corruption and just plutocracy, right? So at that point, yes, what we do need to do is to think about how what is this Indian Indian citizen that we're talking about. Sometimes we seem to think that it's Gandhi's sort of mass project and Ambedkar's constitutional frame, which were brought together by Nehru, and that's what this country is. This country, as we know it today, is like it goes back to even 13th century, right? Because this idea of Amir Khusro, for example, talking about I come from the Hindavi land, therefore it's only fair that I speak of things Hindavi, right? And the Sufis and the Bhakti poets and the religious reformers, and they have created a certain kind of space. Now that space is largely unclaimed by both performers and academicians. So I think that's this citizenship is not just like if it's just a bill and all of that's one thing. It is what kind of a lived experience is it, and how do you translate this kind of it's like Malayalam movies, not now, maybe 10-15 years ago, because it talked about like some, I don't know how many royal families are left in Kerala, but all of them were obsessing over, majority of them were obsessing over a certain kind of royal pedigree. So there is that kind of cultural right wing, that kind of exclusivism, that kind of elitism that sort of gets worked with. So like at this point, our task is not just fighting a political battle. It is actually to understand understand a social space where you start imagining yourself differently. That may be where a theater would have a lot more role. Not just theater as an institution, but the theatricality, which is all about spaces and energies and impulses, right? Okay. What are the specific ways in which performativity works with lived experience of cultural marginality, embodiment and emancipatory articulation of citizenship as we have seen in Shaheen Bagh? All right. What are the specific ways in which? All right. The performativity, as in like it's actually, it goes both ways. It's interesting because Benjamin somewhere says fascism is the index of a failed revolution, which actually means that both fascism and revolution need people's uprising of a certain kind, right? So you could think of revolution as counter-fascism or fascism as counter-revolution, right? So the important aspect, like I said in my presentation, is the claiming of the space, coming together. It's the new bodies. For example, people thought, oh, all these working women, these old women, these Muslim women, they're always like, both the community and from outside, they were all seen as people who never had a voice, who never had any understanding. Suddenly, when they came up, it upset all our debates. For example, one interesting thing is that we've always had this idea that, India-Pakistan partition, right? So we talk about India and Pakistan, there was partition, and, a majority of Muslims voted for the partition. It's a talk that always goes on. And it's interesting who voted for Pakistan. Not Muslims as a group, because who had voting rights then? Not everybody had voting rights. You had to own land to be voting, right? You had to be largely you had to be male to be voting. It was not a people's vote. It was a vote. It was universal suffrage is a post-independent Nehruvian idea. Before that, we didn't have it, right? So the ones who voted are the elite upper caste male people who then moved out to Pakistan. But if you look at the lower caste women, they were all stuck. Like, for example, if you look at Uttar Pradesh and Delhi, population of Muslims, after the partition, it increased because nobody left, literally, other than the rich ones, the powerful ones. Right? From Punjab and Bengal, there's a different story. Now, this is something that we didn't think of because there was a narrative of Hindu Muslims so much that we never asked who are these people who were voting, right? And you would see them in the media, in like, so for example, if you're showing a gully, like, one of those small little narrow streets in a movie, there'll be a shot from the top. And that will have all these green crescent sort of things hanging around, right? So you thought like, these people were all like, maybe either it's a criminal space or it's a sort of like, a very conservative space. These are the kinds of conversations we've always had. But suddenly we see a bunch of them coming with, I've never seen as many Indian flags as I've seen in China. Like loads, and they have like the idea of India, the Constitution of India, all these figures, and it was all over. And then it was a shock. Personally, I was like, all right, we're listening to them for the first time, right? So they've come out. Because we were always talking about them. We never asked what they had to think, because they thought, these are this kind of areas, so and so will win from here, whatever. That was the narrative, and that narrative has gone completely shattered, right? So the performativity here was not so much like a brilliant kind of thing, but they've never got one thing wrong. Shine back, that is amazing, right? Like anywhere they had threads, they had people walking around, shooting them, all of that. They never lost that track. I mean, this did happen in Selimpur, which is the basis of the riots and all that, right? The kind of terrible things that happened in late February. But for a good 100 days, this never happened. So there's a certain way in which it broke the narrative. It killed it delegitimized the abstract narrative in the service of bodies, energies, performances, right? So that's the thing, and how they created that space. There's a Fatima Sheikh and Savitri Phule library there. There's like children had to be taken care of. Women were speaking about this. They were singing certain things, and the kind of space that they created was hugely important. So that's how I would think of it. Yeah. Givargis AM, there are often unpremeditated moments or events captured on cell phones sometimes, which later become powerful theatrical moments, spawning public events of powerful performative nature. The breath movement following the murder of George Floyd, for instance. This seems to be different from the disciplined and impressive Nazi performative designs you described, or the Modi moment staged in India and abroad. Yeah, obviously, because that's what, like, politics happens in different kinds of theatricalities. Very right, I agree. Because there are moments. This is called overdetermination, because it starts with Freud, and Althusser takes this up. Because, for example, the breath movement, like I Can't Breathe, George Floyd's. We've seen this in 2010 Egypt. When a girl puts up a post on Facebook, says, I have had enough, I'm going to the Tahrir Square. And when they go there, and she's joined by a number of people, and the monarch, the dictator, comes down, right? So the rule collapses. So there are these kinds of moments that come up, like, why do they happen? Because a lot of things, I mean, you didn't expect this, but there is this phenomenon of black swan. Nobody said it would happen, but when it happened, you could always say why it was long time coming, right? You could actually go retrospectively connect the dots. So yes, there are two kinds of energies, there are two kinds of orientations. One is the manipulation of public memory and imagination through spectacles, and the other is the public collectivization becoming a counterforce on ethical terms, right? There are two kinds of things that clearly are there. So when we talk about citizenship and theater, we should never make the mistake of saying theater is a controlling mechanism only, or it's only an emancipatory means. Both are happening. It's a site, right? It's a platform. Yeah. Theater and literature. Delina Joes is asking, theater and literature was used as tool for promoting nationalism during freedom struggle. Are today's politicians using this as in performativity with a pinch of patriotism? Obviously, there is always a kind of performativity, and in some sense, fascism is the aestheticization of politics, says Benjamin, and aestheticization is creating symbols, right? They might not mean anything, but they're like big, they're like a huge thing. And not just politicians, newspapers are doing this all the time, news discussions are doing this all the time. So it's happening all the time. So there is a certain way in which patriotism becomes allegiance to a symbol, not allegiance to a people. Like, if you are a true Indian, then you should be able to love all Indians. But I am a true Indian, and hence I love the land. India belongs to me rather than I belong to India, right? There's a huge difference. So me or my party or my community, there's a certain kind of thing like that comes up. But anyways, always politics is about creating this kind of symbols. So one of the tasks and narratives, abstract narratives, and that's where the discussion goes on, right? The task, and this is we are not able to counter it because none of us are on the ground, right? All the language that we know is it's like the pandemic time. It's lost its meaning, it's lost its connection. So we are not ready to accept that. We are always being alarmist a lot of time. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And not being constructive, not being social enough, not being selfless enough, not being kind enough. We are being self-righteous, we are being judgmental a lot of times. So what happens is, just like the abstract narratives about Indian partition I spoke about, the same thing will happen to our political narratives also. It becomes very self-righteous. Nobody wants to talk to a self-righteous sort of, all-knowing Mr. Know-it-all kind of person. Nobody wants to talk to any such thing. So because of that, there is a certain way in which this is happening in politics, because it becomes a fight of symbols, it becomes aestheticized entities, it becomes meaningless floaty entities. So it's a big problem, and I think and it keeps getting, it's not like, like I said, every politician, right? If you look at Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is how is he supported? Why is he supported? I mean, I can't understand. But if you look at what Donald Trump is saying, it's one thing. But if you actually go back, you pan the camera, you zoom out and you pan this camera back, and then you see the entire space, it is a very different energy, right? And that's where they see an instrument in him, they see a possibility in him, they see him taking revenge for their unaddressed issues. There are all kinds of things, right? And I know it's very difficult to be patient about these things, but there is something that that we have to include. We have to look at the spaces, we have to look at the theatricality, we have to look at the performativity to actually understand what's going on a lot of times. Otherwise, I think I'm afraid we might not understand. Yeah. So Hari Jayant is asking, what's the connection between theater and democracy? Yeah, I mean, democracy from its origins throughout its history, like I hope to have explained, it is democracy is performed just like our parliament house is designed. So it is a performed entity, and the individual, unlike a lot of liberals would like to think, we all think and then we all think together and we do what is best. There is no such historical example, right? It's like saying knowledge creates harmony. Knowledge historically hasn't created harmony. It has been a tool of oppression, right? So that way, democracy is liberal democracy is a very theatrically negotiated thing, but within the middle classes. And other democracies, for example, like the democratizing projects of Gandhi or Nehru, even like for example, Ambedkar's famous opposition to the lack of procedures and then like upsetting kind of movements. He says, no, you have to work within a system. Educate, organize, educate, agitate, all of that is fine, but you have to work within a certain kind of system. He's not going into an anti-state narrative at all. I mean, he works with constitutional morality while speaking for social freedom. So he has a certain understanding of Indian democracy, which is actually hugely theatrical, right? Even Gandhi is like I've explained. Yeah. How can we address and solve historic tensions between the passivity of the spectator and the active engagement of a citizen? All right. How can we address and solve the historical tensions between? See, there is this idea of the spectator coming from Augusto Boal in Brazil. So how can we make participant? And this is the basic idea of Breath, who I briefly mentioned, Dario Fo, Augusto Boal. All these people are, both Breath and Dario Fo, are trying to undo European theatre, whereas Boal is trying to come up with a post-colonial sort of an understanding of a community through theatre. So politician is a vigilant citizen, right? That's how it should be. And at that point, you have to sort of create small spaces where you collectivize, and then that's what Augusto Boal says. If there are 32 of us, we have to come to the 33rd position. We have to create that. It doesn't exist. You can't create it in mind. It has to be created through bodies and spaces and voices and body voice imagination. That's the idea. So if you create that kind of a conversational theater space, its political counterpart would be participatory democracy. So which would be transparent, which would enable, which would create, which would be more inclusive. So that's one way in which you can do it. So you create small communities and as part of it do theater, right? In schools, in colleges, in local village areas. That sort of an organic coming together would create a new language, and if you put it together, if it has a theoretical base, it'll work. We don't have that kind of grassroots kind of understanding now. I mean, Kerala also, because it's this hyper-capitalist society with feudal values and a very emancipatory socialist rhetoric. That's how our state seems to be working. That's because of its historical and economic speciality. So we could think of those kinds of mechanisms. So, you think of participatory democracy, you think of actors as, viewers as active, right? So, for example, there is this new newspaper theater. The only thing is you just read newspapers and you see all the contradictions and conflicts and the lies that are hidden there. Because for sensationalism, you always overdo. So if you just watch like one channel's news for 10 days and you punch holes into it, you would actually be creating a certain kind of check. But we don't have that kind of research material now. So we can always do that. So Yeah, as long as, and in a pandemic time, it's so important because we don't know what the solution is, right, frankly, right? I mean, how do we know what the solution is, right? Nobody has seen this. So the only thing is to create a social solution. And the social solution means thinking for everyone, thinking with everyone, right? And for that, theater can do a lot. But somehow theater is seen as spectacle, not just by paid, hugely rich corporate funded politicians, but also a lot of times by our own film or theater makers. I mean, I don't think just a theater work in terms of social impact would be a realistic one in a space like Kerala. So theater has to be seen as not just an institution, and I'm repeating this point, theater has to be seen as a means of social investigation. Theatricality has to be studied in our everyday performances, our spaces, our architecture, various other things, right? And through that we can develop this. Can you comment on Anu Erikal asks, can you comment on Bertolt Brecht's epic theater distancing the audience where they are aware that they're watching a performance? Yeah, this comes from Brecht's idea, comes from his anti-Nazi activism, because Hitler, like I said, brought back the 17th century sort of ideas on gypsies and Jews and everything. That's one thing. More importantly, he did that through performance, through spectacles. You can't think, there is Susan Sontag's famous book, Fascinating Fascism. And she says that, you might think Marxists were cheated into supporting a fascist. No, they wanted it at some point. It is created. It's very fascinating. It's like going for a DJ, right? It arrests your senses. It's very energetic. So that's the whole idea. So because of that, Brecht's primary idea was that we live in a scientific age, and in a scientific age, it's not a magical age anymore. What's the difference between magic and science? Magic is science unexplained, and science is magic explained. If that is the case, you have to create a certain kind of pleasure out of activating mind rather than giving them sleeping pills. Right, so it's like you create a space where it's like an experiment, a laboratory table. So you take a frog and cut it dissect it into pieces, and you see the insides. So you know more about frogs, you know more about animals, creatures now than you used to be. So that's how you have to think about the social science, the patterns, the reasons for people's behavior. Why do they behave the way they do in certain situations, which tells us more about the society than about the character. So it's a certain kind of, when you distance a person, because identification is a problem, because you start crying, you lose everything, you go into it and you think, oh my God, this is all, terribly lost. So you get sentimental, you get melodramatic, all of that. So it doesn't help. So I'll give you a quick example. I know I'm taking more time. I'll just take 2 more minutes if that's okay. Like, for example, you see corruption all around and you feel very angry about it. It's corruption, it's very bad, it's terrible. And you go and watch a movie, right, in which there's a villain, corrupt villain, terrible villain like Sai Kumar in a Malayalam movie or something like that. And on the other hand is Mammootty, who's everything good. And you've seen, the villain as a rapist, as a smuggler, as a murderer. He kills for nothing, and all the personification of evil. And then you get very angry, and then you see Mammootty on the other side, finally killing off the villain. You think, oh, it's all fine. You went in with an unease about corruption. You came out with this happiness of, oh, the corrupt person the embodiment of corruption has been finished off by the hero. But the fact is, your problem was not created by a movie. It was not Sai Kumar that is your problem. Your problem was the college management that asked you for donation. Your problem was the doctor who asked you for commission. Your problem was the village officer who asked you bribe, that's gone, right? So this is why your problem didn't start with the movie or with the story or anything. It started in the society. So you should be directed towards social issues. That's the idea that Brett comes up with. Yeah. I don't know if that explains this. Anyways, I think our time is up. Thank you so much for being very patient, and there have been some lovely questions. I enjoyed them. Thank you so much. Yeah.